Two little girls, dressed in their best clothes, holding hands, full of wonder and excitement. It was supposed to be their very first flight, a magical birthday trip across the sky. But instead, they were stopped at the gate and told they didn't belong. Why would airline staff single out two 9-year-old black girls from a crowd of passengers? What made one flight attendant glance at their boarding passes and say, "This can't be right," and what happens when their father, calm, powerful, and quietly watching from afar, receives a single text from his daughters, and within minutes, grounds an entire airline's fleet. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about dignity, about what happens when quiet injustice meets unwavering love, and what unfolds when power is no longer silent. So if you believe every child deserves to feel seen, if you've ever watched someone be judged for simply existing, then stay right here, because what happens next will move you, shake you, and stay with you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real emotional stories that challenge what we think we know. Now, let's begin. The airport was unusually quiet that morning. It was 7:22 a.m., and sunlight poured through the tall windows of Terminal B, streaking across the polished tile floor like golden rivers. A janitor hummed while mopping, his radio whispering faint jazz. The smell of cinnamon rolls from the nearby bakery mingled with that ever-present scent of jet fuel and tired leather. In the midst of it all, two little girls sat quietly near Gate 43, identical in every visible way. They each had dark brown skin, tightly coiled ponytails tied with sunflower clips, and carried matching purple unicorn backpacks. They were no more than 7 years old, though their eyes carried a kind of stillness far beyond their age. "Do you think Daddy's already in Chicago?" the girl on the left asked, her voice soft but curious. "No," the other replied, clutching her boarding pass. "He said he'd wait for us at the gate." Remember, their names were Aria and Amira Dalton, fraternal twins, but always referred to as the Mirror Girls by family and friends. Their mother had passed away 2 years prior, and their father, Malcolm Dalton, had since become both a parent and a fortress. Malcolm was the founder and CEO of AerisTech, a private aerospace firm that had recently made headlines for launching the first hybrid electric jet prototype. But no matter how many zeros lined his net worth, or how many handshakes he shared with senators and sheiks, to his daughters, he was simply Dad. And today was supposed to be a milestone. Their first flight alone, a nonstop from Denver to Chicago. They had memorized every rule: how to fasten the seatbelt, where to keep the ID, how to hold hands while walking down the jet bridge. Everything was set. But sometimes, no matter how prepared you are, the world throws you a different kind of turbulence. A voice called from the gate podium, "Dalton, Aria and Dalton, Amira, please come to the counter." The girls stood. Their dresses swayed as they walked up, a blend of excitement and nervousness buzzing between them. The gate agent, a woman in her late 40s named Carla, with platinum blonde hair styled into a tight bun, didn't smile when they approached. "You girls are flying alone?" she asked, glancing down at their tickets. "Yes, ma'am." Aria nodded. "Our dad booked the flight. He spoke with the airline staff already." "Ms.," Rachel said, "we're cleared." Carla clicked her pen. "Rachel's not here anymore," she said, her voice low. "Wait right here." The girls looked at each other. They weren't used to adults sounding like that. Not suspicious, not cold. They were used to kindness from strangers, compliments about their hair, smiles about their backpacks. A few minutes passed. Carla picked up the phone and spoke in a hushed tone. She looked over at them twice, then back to the screen. Another woman appeared behind the counter, this one younger, with dark red lipstick and a matching navy blazer. Her name tag read Danielle. She leaned down toward the girls, crouching at their eye level. "Hi, sweethearts," she began with a honeyed voice. "I'm afraid we can't let you board this flight today." The words fell like bricks. Amira blinked. "Why not?" "Well," Danielle tilted her head, "there's a policy change. Children under 8 flying alone require a supervisor escorting them to the gate in Chicago. We don't have confirmation of that, but our dad made all the arrangements. Aria insisted. He said we were okay." Danielle smiled tightly. "I understand, but things changed this morning. We just can't make exceptions." A man standing behind them turned. He was white, in his 50s, wearing a Patagonia fleece and holding a caramel latte. He eyed the twins, then the agents. "This is holding up the line," he muttered. Another woman whispered, "Why would 2 little black girls be flying alone?" Aria's eyes welled. They had done nothing wrong. Just moments ago, they were singing a song about clouds and making up stories about the snacks they would get on board. Now, they were being watched, judged, questioned, all without a parent in sight. Amira stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. "Can we call our dad?" Danielle paused. "I'm afraid we can't let you use the phone behind the counter." "We have our own," Amira said. "He said to call if anything felt weird." She unzipped her backpack and pulled out a pink case. The agents looked at each other. Carla reached forward, almost as if to stop her, but didn't. Amira hit one button. It rang once, then again. On the third, a calm voice answered, "Hey, baby girl, you at the gate." Amira looked around, then turned the speaker on. "Daddy." "They said we can't get on the plane." The voice on the other end shifted in tone. "What do you mean?" "They said we need someone in Chicago to meet us. But we already did all the papers." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Then came the voice again. This time, quieter, controlled. "Put the phone near the agent." Danielle hesitated, but something in the weight of the moment made her accept it. She took the phone. "Hello, this is Gate Agent." The phone beeped. Another voice joined the call. "This is Donovan Klein, Senior VP of Airline Operations." Danielle stiffened. "Why are 2 confirmed minor passengers being denied boarding?" Klein asked. "This booking was flagged priority 2 days ago by AerisTech Corporate. I wasn't aware of that," Danielle said. The phone beeped again. A third voice now. Deep. Resonant? "This is Malcolm Dalton." A silence fell over Gate 43. Passengers were now watching. Phones began to lift, some recording the screen. A murmur spread. Danielle looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. "I'm giving you 60 seconds, Malcolm said, "to correct this mistake before it becomes policy history." Aria looked up at Amira. Neither smiled. But in their small fingers, still clutched together, there was a quiet kind of strength, a strength that didn't need permission to exist, a strength they got from their father. And something in the room shifted. The winds were changing. The boarding tunnel echoed with uncertainty. Kira and Nyla Daniels clutched their bags tighter as they followed the quiet hum of the passengers shuffling forward. Their eyes flicked toward each other, trying to stay calm, as the gate agent's sudden resistance still weighed heavy. They had done everything right. They had checked in, passed security, held boarding passes like everyone else. But now, as they reached the plane door, the moment of peace shattered again. "Excuse me," the flight attendant said, stepping into the narrow entryway. She was tall, fair-skinned, her chestnut bun tightly pinned, blazer sharply pressed. Her name tag read Kristen Beyer. Her gaze landed on the girls and tightened. "You two," she said, not unkindly, but firmly. "May I see your tickets again?" Kira instinctively handed hers over, followed by Nyla. Kristen scanned them, then looked up slowly. "These are for business class." "Yes, ma'am," Kira said politely. Kristen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm going to ask you to step aside. We'll sort this out before you sit." Behind them, a businessman coughed impatiently. Kira's brows pinched slightly, but she nodded and took Nyla's hand. "We'll wait," she whispered. They stepped to the side as passengers filed past, their glances ranging from curious to indifferent. The girls stood quietly. They'd been taught not to cause scenes, but the feeling was growing again, that slow throb of embarrassment mixed with something deeper. Kristen walked back to the galley and returned with another flight attendant, a blonde woman in her 30s, Ashley Monroe. They both spoke quietly to each other, glancing toward the girls. After a few minutes, Kristen returned. "There seems to be a problem with your upgrade," she said. "Business class is full. We'll need to reseat you in the back." Kira blinked. "We booked business days ago." Nyla tugged her arm. "We have the seats Daddy gave us," she whispered, her voice cracking. Kristen's smile thinned. "Young ladies, please don't make this difficult. You're holding up the boarding process." Kira took a deep breath. "We're not trying to cause trouble, but our father, he booked these for us. We're not flying for fun. We're going to see our grandmother. She's in the hospital." That truth hung in the air, but it didn't soften Kristen's posture. "Everyone has a reason. Please proceed to economy." Kira didn't move. Something inside her snapped. Quietly, but firmly. She remembered the conversations with her dad about standing up without shouting, about being calm even when others tried to shake your center. She didn't want to be seen as angry. She just wanted fairness. "I'm sorry," she said, "but we're not moving. These are our seats." Kristen's expression froze, and a new voice emerged behind her. "What's the issue here?" A tall man in a gray uniform stepped into the entrance. His badge read Captain Miles Redding. His voice was calm but tight, already on edge. Kristen stepped aside. "Disruption over seating," she said. "They're refusing to move to economy? The upgrade wasn't authorized." Kira's cheeks burned. "We weren't upgraded," she said. "We were booked in business by our father. We've flown this route before. There was no problem then." The captain looked at their tickets, then back at Kristen, and the manifest Ashley Monroe handed over a tablet. "There was an override yesterday." "Sir, their names are on the list, but marked for review." Captain Redding hesitated. Marked by who? Ashley glanced down. "System says internal flag. No initials." "Then why did the gate let them board?" he asked. Ashley shrugged. "Not sure, sir." "Let's move this along," a passenger muttered from the jet bridge. The captain looked at Kira and Nyla, then sighed. "Girls, please just take the economy seats. You'll still get to your destination." Nyla's eyes welled. Kira stayed silent. For a moment, she wanted to scream, but instead, she pulled out her phone. Kristen's hand lifted. "No calls during boarding." "It's on airplane mode," Kira said. "But I'm pulling up a note. My father's contact. If you check, you'll see the corporate booking." Kristen ignored her. "We need to get them off. Now." Captain Redding stiffened. "Are you saying they can't fly?" "They're obstructing boarding, delaying the cabin," Kira said quietly. "Our dad is Mr. Elijah Daniels, CEO of Solaris Aviation Systems." Kristen scoffed. "That has nothing to do with this flight." It does, Kira said, because this flight runs Solaris integrated software, the same systems Dad built. Ashley looked up suddenly. Captain Redding's expression shifted. Kira's voice trembled. Please, call him, or scan our QR code again. The seats are ours. But Kristen had already lifted her hand, signaling to the back. Escort, please. Two uniformed airport officers began walking briskly up the tunnel. Passengers craned their necks. A baby began crying behind them. The engine hum softened into silence. Kira looked at Nyla. Her sister was trembling. Don't cry, Kira whispered. We didn't do anything wrong. As the officers arrived, Captain Redding muttered, let's not make this worse. But then, Nyla spoke, just 3 words, a whisper. Call Daddy now. It was soft, but it hit like thunder. Because in that moment, every person in the boarding tunnel suddenly wondered, who was Daddy? Kristen folded her arms. This isn't a negotiation. Remove them. Please. Kira took one final breath and tapped her father's name on her screen. She didn't press call. She didn't need to. The call was already coming in. Her phone lit up, flashing a name. Incoming. Call Elijah Daniels. Passengers saw it. The officers hesitated. Captain Redding narrowed his eyes. Ashley Monroe leaned forward. Wait, she said. Did you say Elijah Daniels? From Solaris, Kira nodded. The captain took the phone and answered. His face paled. Kristen's mouth opened, but no words came. And that was when the ground shook, not from engines, but from realization. The cabin lights had dimmed. A soft hum vibrated through the plane as passengers settled in with blankets and earbuds, flipping through in-flight magazines or nodding off against headrests. At first glance, nothing about seat 4A seemed unusual. Just a man with a book, reading glasses perched low on his nose, a travel mug of coffee held steady in one hand. But Brielle noticed him because he had looked up, not at her, not at Kenna, but at the gate where they had been turned away. His eyes lingered longer than most. Kenna, pressed into her seat near the window, whispered. He saw it. The whole thing. Brielle nodded. I think he did. His name was Elijah Monroe. Middle-aged, African-American, quiet demeanor, tailored gray blazer, dark jeans, wedding ring worn smooth at the edges. He had boarded silently, said nothing to the crew, asked for no assistance. But there was something in the way he observed everything, like he was recording it in his mind. The girl's mother, Ava, sat between them in row 12. Her hand was still clenched, her jaw tight. She hadn't said a word since they sat down. Mom, Brielle whispered, are you okay? Ava didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stared ahead, unblinking. Then she said, softly but with weight, it wasn't just about the seats. Kenna looked over. What do you mean? Ava sighed. It was the look on that flight attendant's face, like she'd already made up her mind, like you weren't supposed to be here. That look, I've seen it before. The cabin crew passed by, offering drinks. None of them acknowledged Ava or the girls. No eye contact, no smiles. Elijah and 4A watched them too. About 15 minutes into the flight, turbulence rocked the cabin. Nothing major, just a ripple, enough for people to shift in their seats. One of the attendants lost grip on a tray and nearly spilled a soda on a man in business class. She apologized quickly, loudly, smiling, Kenna whispered to Brielle. Where was that energy for us? The intercom crackled. A standard announcement. Weather smooth ahead. Expected arrival on time. Elijah leaned his head against the window, but he wasn't asleep. From the aisle, Ava's hands clutched the hem of her sweater. Her mind raced, not just about the flight, but about the headlines she'd read just a week ago, about the board of directors, the murmurs at her job, the unspoken tension when people talked about certain passengers or upholding premium experiences. She looked at her daughters, their braids neatly done, their faces still holding hope and hurt in equal measure. Then she noticed Elijah again. He had opened his phone, but the way he held it was different. His screen showed something not quite ordinary. A small security login screen, multiple authentication layers, a fingerprint request. This wasn't casual browsing. "Brielle," Ava said quietly, "do you know who that man is?" Brielle looked up. "No," she replied, "but I think he's important. Elijah Monroe wasn't just any man in 4A. He was the senior systems strategist for TransLink Aviation Holdings, a position so high up in the digital command chain that any irregularity in flight operations, passenger treatment logs, or crew conduct reports passed through his encrypted dashboard. But he wasn't on this flight as an executive. He was on vacation, alone. His first in 6 years, until tonight. He had seen the exchange at the gate, watched the girls get denied, heard the mother's calm protest, and then watched the crew shift uncomfortably, aware of what they'd done but too proud or trained to admit error. And now here he was, silently compiling every detail: flight number, crew names, gate timestamp. His fingers moved quickly. He opened a secure message window. To Chancellor Ross, subject passenger complaint, urgent attachments live, timeline, crew conduct log video feed timestamp, 17:02. He paused before writing the body of the message, then typed, 2 minor passengers were denied boarding from their assigned seats in row 3 by gate staff citing vague procedural justification. No apology issued. Witness tone and treatment inconsistent with customer care protocols and possibly racially biased. I recommend a suspension of crew authorization pending review. See attached logs. I will contact regulatory partners if not addressed in the next 60 minutes. Then, with one tap, he sent it. Back in row 12, Ava had seen the movement. She knew something was happening. Her years in corporate environments taught her how power often moved silently. And whoever Elijah was, he wasn't just watching. He was acting. Ava whispered to her daughters, "Stay calm. Things might shift soon." Kenna frowned. "What do you mean shift?" Before Ava could answer, "There was a ping." Then the pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Calm. Professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed of a potential systems issue affecting our internal crew operations log. We will be conducting an in-flight review. Please remain seated and stay tuned for updates. Thank you." The cabin fell silent. The lead flight attendant, her name badge read. Candace moved swiftly toward the cockpit, whispering to another crew member along the way. She looked pale. Elijah in 4A quietly closed his laptop. He sipped his coffee, then glanced down the aisle toward Ava and the girls. He offered the smallest nod, not of comfort, but of recognition. He had done what they could not because they were incapable, but because the system hadn't listened to them. Yet it would listen to him, in the cockpit. The captain was frowning. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered. His co-pilot shrugged. "We just got a priority flag from corporate command. They want the crew logs. Apparently someone high up is watching this flight." The captain tapped his screen. They sent the video of the gate scene. He turned the screen so his co-pilot could see. The footage showed Ava calmly explaining, the girls standing quietly, the gate agent shaking her head, then escorting them to the back. The co-pilot's face turned grim. "This doesn't look good." "No," the captain replied. It doesn't. He reached for the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're awaiting further instruction. Thank you for your patience. Down in row 12, Ava closed her eyes for a moment. The shift was happening. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time since the gate, she didn't feel alone in it. Not entirely. And across from her, Brielle looked over at her sister. "Kenna," she whispered. "Yeah, I think they're about to find out who we really are." Kenna tilted her head. "And who's that?" Brielle looked straight ahead. "Daughters of the man who can stop time in the skies." And she meant it. The air in Gate 17 had grown thick with tension. Olivia's voice still echoed in Alana's mind, her soft plea cutting through the noise like a violin string ready to snap. "He's our dad, and he's going to fix this." Alana stood frozen, her hand gently gripping Olivia's as flight attendant Cheryl still lingered at the counter, her expression a mix of irritation and control. Passengers watched from their seats or peered over shoulders, some whispering, others simply absorbing the moment with quiet unease. But amid that stillness, something began to shift. In row 2, a man slowly closed the leather-bound notebook he'd been writing in. He wore a charcoal gray sport coat over a navy turtleneck. Wire-rimmed glasses perched just low enough for him to look over them. His eyes had been fixed on the girls since the confrontation began. Now he stood. He didn't rush forward like a hero in a movie. He moved slowly, deliberately, walking with the confidence of someone used to silence rather than applause. As he approached the counter, a few passengers turned in their seats, sensing something different about him. Alana noticed him only when his shadow stretched beside her. "Excuse me," he said calmly, voice deep but unthreatening. "I've been watching what's happening here, and I'd like to ask why these two girls were denied boarding." Cheryl turned, clearly annoyed. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "I think it does," the man replied, not flinching. "I heard everything. The girls had valid tickets, the same as anyone else, and unless something's changed about how boarding rights work, they have every right to be on that plane." Alana felt Olivia squeeze her hand. She looked up at the stranger. There was something measured in the way he spoke. Not confrontational, not loud, but firm, like the kind of voice her father used when he wanted change without raising it. Cheryl took a breath. "Sir, there's a process. The system marked their tickets as invalid. That's all. It's airline policy." "Policy," the man repeated, eyes narrowing. "Let me ask you something. If these girls were not black, do you believe the system would have found their tickets invalid? The air caught?" Cheryl blinked. So did the gate agent beside her. "That's a serious accusation," she snapped, though her tone lacked certainty. "I didn't accuse," he said. "I asked. But your discomfort tells me plenty." He turned slightly, addressing the growing group of passengers watching. Everyone here saw it. Two well-dressed black teens, traveling alone, told they were not allowed to board. No real reason given. No explanation. Just refused. Meanwhile, several passengers were waved on with barely a glance. He paused. "I wonder how many of you were thinking the same thing, but stayed quiet." The terminal stayed hushed, but eyes shifted. A few heads nodded. Alana looked around. For the first time, she saw something shifting, something uncomfortable being stirred awake. From behind the counter, Cheryl's voice faltered. "I don't have to explain myself to you." "Of course not," the man replied. "But you may have to explain yourself to the person these girls just called. Because if I'm right, you've made a very big mistake." A ripple of movement shot through the crowd. Suddenly, Alana's phone buzzed again. She checked it. One message. 3 words. Is she still there? Alana's heart skipped. Her thumb hovered. She replied quickly. Yes, still here. And someone is helping us. Seconds later, her phone rang. It was him. She hesitated only a moment, then answered, Dad. The calm in her voice caught Olivia's attention too. Alana listened carefully, nodding silently as her father's tone poured into her ear like a tide coming in. Not angry, not frantic, but focused, precise. She hung up and turned toward the gate. Ms. Cheryl, she said evenly, my father asked me to pass on a message. He's contacting corporate legal and operations. They are requesting the name of the employee responsible for the denied boarding incident. He suggests you remain at the gate. Cheryl laughed sharply, clearly assuming it was a bluff. Oh, really? And who is this mysterious father of yours? But the man in the turtleneck already knew. His face didn't change. He just nodded to himself, then stepped aside and returned to his seat in row 2, picking up his notebook as if he'd merely paused to mark a moment in history. Then it happened. A voice crackled from the PA system overhead. It wasn't the usual flat tone of boarding announcements. It was measured, deliberate, and direct. Attention staff and passengers of Flight 308 to Seattle. Please be advised, a temporary suspension of boarding is now in effect. All staff are required to remain in place. A review team is en route. This is a formal request from Trans-Sky Air Executive Operations. Thank you for your cooperation. The silence that followed was deafening. Passengers looked around. Some stood, others whispered. Cheryl's face drained of color. Alana looked at Olivia, who was now smiling for the first time since they'd been stopped. It wasn't a grin of revenge. It was relief. A quiet confirmation that their truth had weight, that their voices, once small in a crowd of compliance, had been heard, but it wasn't over. Within minutes, 2 men in suits arrived through the boarding tunnel. One carried a tablet, the other wore a discreet badge clipped to his belt. They didn't greet anyone. They walked straight to the counter and requested Cheryl by name. Ma'am, the one with the badge said, You've been temporarily relieved of gate duties pending investigation. Please step aside. Cheryl sputtered, but the words never came. Her authority, once ironclad at this terminal, dissolved like mist in sunlight. The man in row 2 didn't even look up. He was already writing again. For the first time, Alana let herself breathe deeply. Not because the world had been fixed, but because today, someone stood with them, someone believed them, and somewhere, her father was moving pieces that others thought untouchable. The flight would eventually resume, but something had shifted in the air. The invisible became visible, the silent heard, and the dismissed finally seen. Row 2 felt like the center of the universe. After the verbal outburst from the gate agent and the stunned silence that followed, every eye turned toward the 2 girls in first class. Taylor and Trina sat as still as statues, their backs straight, hands folded tightly in their laps. You could almost hear the thrum of tension in the air, louder than the engines preparing for takeoff. Taylor's throat tightened. She could feel it again. The way her skin crawled when people looked at her not as a person, but as a problem. Trina had slid her hand over her sister's, grounding her, just like she always did. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, Flight Attendant Becky Larson was furiously whispering into the cabin phone. Yes, I'm aware they're sitting there. That's the issue, she hissed into the handset. I don't care what the manifest says. The supervisor told me she stopped mid-sentence as Captain Reynolds stepped out of the cockpit, his presence suddenly commanding. His voice was low but firm. Becky, I'll take it from here. Her lips tightened. They're not supposed to be in first class. The manifest has their names in row 2, he replied without flinching, and the reservation code is Platinum Tier. Do you know what that means? She looked away. Reynolds gave a small nod. Thought so. In the cabin, murmurs had begun again. One couple, a few rows behind Taylor and Trina, were arguing quietly but audibly. Another woman leaned into the aisle and whispered to her husband. Do you think they snuck in? Trina clenched her jaw. Her instinct was to shout, to make them see who she was, who they were, that their presence wasn't a mistake. But her father's words rang in her head. When the world gets loud, stay still. Truth needs no volume. So she stayed silent. It was then that Officer Lucas Gentry entered the plane, clipboard in hand, heavy boots echoing on the jet bridge floor. A quick conversation at the front of the plane led him down the aisle until he stood directly beside the girls. Taylor looked up, heart thudding. He was tall, imposing, with aviator sunglasses and a badge glinting at his waist. Everything about him said authority, and he wasn't smiling. Ladies, he said flatly, I'm going to need you to come with me for a moment. Why? Taylor asked softly, her voice steady even though her hands were trembling. Just a standard check. A mistake was reported in the seating manifest. We need to clear it up before we can depart. But our names are on those seats, Trina said, and we have the confirmation on our phones. You can show me once we're off the plane. No, came a voice from the cockpit. It was Captain Reynolds again. Everyone turned as he stepped into the aisle. Officer Gentry. The manifest clearly lists Taylor and Trina Jefferson in those seats. They boarded properly. They are not in violation of any regulation. This is not your jurisdiction. Officer Gentry narrowed his eyes. I was told by gate security that there was a discrepancy. I have the authority to detain anyone until cleared. Reynolds crossed his arms. Unless you have probable cause or a safety concern, you're interfering with passenger rights. You will not remove them without cause. The silence was ice cold. Passengers were now filming openly. A young man in a hoodie held his phone high, capturing everything. A woman in row 4 muttered, "This is disgusting." At that exact moment, Trina's phone buzzed. It was a text from her father. Sit tight. Phone call made. Trust me. She showed it to Taylor, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Down at the gate, chaos was brewing. Delays were rippling across the system. Something was jamming up clearance for the next 6 outbound flights. In a glass-walled executive lounge 2 terminals over, Silas Jefferson was on a secure line. He had called the airline COO directly. Not a spokesperson, not customer service. The man who signed the quarterly reports. You have 5 minutes to fix this, Silas said coolly. I want an apology. On this flight, from that flight attendant and your gate supervisor, in front of my daughters and every single passenger on that aircraft, and if I don't get it, he paused, I'll give you something to remember me by. The COO stammered, Mr. Jefferson, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. That's the point. Back in the cabin, the phone at the front rang. Captain Reynolds picked it up, listened, then turned. Becky, front now. The flight attendant walked forward, visibly shaken. You'll apologize to them, publicly, but now. her mouth twisted in something between resentment and shame. She walked down the aisle, every pair of eyes following her, phone lenses trained on her movement. She stopped in front of Taylor and Trina, her hands fidgeting in front of her skirt. I'm sorry, she said, eyes lowered. There was a mistake. I didn't mean to question your presence. It won't happen again. Taylor stared at her. You didn't question our presence. You questioned our right to exist here. Becky's lip quivered. She nodded and turned away quickly, rushing back to the galley. The officer exited the plane without a word. But the damage had already spread, because one of the videos specifically, the one from the teenager in the hoodie, had just gone viral. And the caption read, "Twin black girls removed from first class because they didn't belong. Until captain says, not on my plane." The comment section exploded, and the story was far from over. As the plane sat motionless on the tarmac, the crew moved with increasing confusion. First-class passengers grew restless, and in business class, several people began turning their heads toward the cockpit and murmuring among themselves. The engine's hum was the only sound for several moments, a low drone against the rising tension. In the holding area, Aubrey and Autumn sat quietly now, hands still intertwined. A security officer who had been standing at the entrance glanced down at his radio and furrowed his brow. Something had shifted in the air. A sense of unease settled, like a mist, inside the plane. The pilot stepped out from the cockpit, his hat under his arm, his expression hard to read. Captain Jonathan Meade was a seasoned aviator, used to handling emergencies, storms, even sudden landings. But this was different. He looked down at his tablet, reading the notification again. All inbound and outbound flights suspended pending internal directive. Do not depart. Await further instructions. It wasn't FAA. It was direct from Apex Global Aviation. He scanned the first-class cabin, stopping at the flight attendant, Tricia, still standing rigid by the galley. Her posture told a story. She knew something had gone terribly wrong, but didn't understand how or why. The pilot cleared his throat and spoke calmly but firmly into the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Meade. We've received instructions from airline leadership to remain at our current gate. I will update you shortly. For now, please remain seated. Thank you for your patience. The message, brief as it was, sent a wave of whispers through the plane. Meanwhile, in the administrative control towers of the airport, calls were flying between departments. Inside a glass-walled office, a woman in a navy suit stared at a monitor showing a security feed of the holding area. On screen, two young girls sat quietly near a vending machine. Across from them, a staff member who had initiated their removal nervously tapped his pen on the desk. "Confirm again," she said into the phone. "You're telling me the girls were removed based on a staff member's visual assumption. No verification of name, no consultation with the manifest." The voice on the other end stammered, "Yes, ma'am, but they were standing apart from their nanny and didn't produce IDs." The gate attendant said they looked confused. The woman leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. They always say that. Confused. Lost. Not quite fitting. She had heard those excuses before. Then she opened a message just forwarded to her inbox. The sender's name stopped her heart cold. Dominic Ramsey. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. Back on the plane. Tricia approached the cockpit slowly. She knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Captain Meade," she said, voice low. "Is this about the girls?" He glanced over his shoulder. "You knew them." She hesitated. "No, sir. But they were in line earlier. Two little black girls with a white nanny. I didn't think much of it at the time. Captain Meade turned fully to face her now, arms folded. Did anyone verify their ticket? I don't know, sir. I believe Gate B-19 handled it. You believe? He repeated. Well, someone verified enough to cancel this flight from above our heads. Trisha's eyes widened. Captain Meade tapped the edge of his tablet. We just got word that Apex Global's own CEO, Dominic Ramsey, was watching. His daughters were denied boarding. Trisha's mouth parted. What, they're his children? And the airline is now under a full operational pause. We're waiting for a ground supervisor and legal team. In that moment, Trisha's professional veneer cracked. Her voice trembled. I didn't know. I didn't even speak to them. They were just gone when I turned around. Captain Meade nodded slowly. And that's the problem. Trisha, nobody asked. Nobody checked. Everyone just assumed. Out by the vending machines. Autumn leaned her head against Aubrey's shoulder. Do you think Daddy's mad? She whispered. No, Aubrey replied, staring at the glass doors. I think he's really quiet when he's mad. And indeed, Dominic Ramsey was quiet, but not inactive. In a private lounge on the opposite end of the terminal, Dominic sat in front of a laptop surrounded by two Apex executives and his legal advisor. His jacket was folded neatly on the couch. His voice was low and composed. I want full documentation. Every staff member who interacted with my daughters. Every decision made between their arrival at the gate and their removal. The younger executive gulped. Yes, sir. We've already retrieved security footage and voice recordings. I also contacted human resources. Dominic looked up. Good. Because this isn't about me. It's about how many families this happens to. Mine just happened to have a camera watching. He closed the laptop and stood. I'm going to them. Security detail shadowed him as he walked through the staff entrance, bypassing the passenger corridors. When he stepped into the holding area, Aubrey saw him first. Daddy! She leaped up, Autumn close behind. The security guard stepped back as both girls raced toward their father. Dominic knelt, arms open wide. He caught them both, one on each side, and held them close, his cheek pressed to their hair. Neither of them cried. They just buried their faces into his chest. I'm so sorry, he murmured. I should have been there sooner. The gate manager hovered awkwardly nearby, suddenly very small beneath the weight of the moment. Mr. Ramsey, he began. Dominic stood, one arm around each girl. Don't, he said, not harsh but final. You've said enough. The airport suddenly felt much quieter. Even the bustling foot traffic beyond the glass seemed to slow. Dominic turned toward his legal aide. I want you to issue a public statement. Not about me. About what happened. About what will change. Make it clear that we have failed, and we will not let it happen again. The aide nodded. And, sir, what do you want to do about this flight? Dominic glanced at the monitor showing the jet still docked at the gate. Leave it grounded. Let the silence speak. Passengers on board watched the minutes tick by. Tension turned to confusion, then worry, then reflection. They didn't know the full story yet, but they would. Because something had shifted, and not just on this flight. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane cruised steadily at 36,000 feet. The hum of the engines had become a backdrop to the strained silence among the passengers in first class. Row 1 had never felt so suffocating. Marla sat with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Every now and then, her eyes flicked toward her daughters in 2A and 2B, separated from her by that wall of injustice. She could barely see them, and that only deepened the ache inside her. Sarai. curled up in her seat, had pressed her forehead against the window. Naomi sat straight-backed, alert, watching everything around them like a hawk. Neither of them looked relaxed. Neither felt safe. Their small overnight bags, now hastily placed in the overhead compartment above economy, carried school books and coloring pencils. Those belonged in their laps, Marla thought bitterly, as they read or drew in peace. But this flight had robbed them of even that. In row 1D, a man with closely cropped hair and tired eyes shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been quiet most of the flight, sipping water slowly, eyes behind wire-frame glasses that studied everything. Marla had noticed him glance their way several times, especially after the incident at the gate. Now he cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice calm and warm. "I couldn't help but overhear earlier. That was your family they separated, wasn't it?" Marla turned slightly hesitant. Her first instinct was caution. She had dealt with too many well-meaning strangers who used her pain as an opportunity for self-righteousness. "Yes," she replied evenly. "Those are my daughters." The man nodded. "It wasn't right, what they did. I know that kind of thing too well. I've seen it far too many times." His voice carried something else now. Not pity. Something deeper. Lived experience. Marla leaned in slightly. "You've seen it." He exhaled. "My name's Theo. Retired air marshal. Used to fly more than I care to count. And I've watched people like you get pulled aside. Watched the little signs. The quiet ones. The loud ones." Marla's posture relaxed just enough to let her shoulders drop. "Then you know how they twist it. Policies, procedures, gate assignments, so many convenient reasons." Theo gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They always have a reason. Doesn't mean it's right." There was a long pause. "I appreciate you saying something," Marla said quietly. "But truth be told, I'm not sure what matters anymore. I called my husband. I'm not even sure what he can do. But I had to let him hear it in my voice. The pain, the powerlessness." Theo looked at her for a moment, then said something unexpected. "Don't mistake your calm for weakness. You sat there and let your girls see you stay composed. That's the kind of strength people don't understand until it changes the world." The words hit Marla harder than she expected. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat. She had held it together for so long. For her girls, for the people who were watching, for the passengers who needed her not to cry, but inside, her mind was a storm of questions. Had she done enough? Had she failed them? Were they thinking she gave up too easily? Marla's voice cracked. "I wanted them to feel like they belong. To know they don't have to ask for space in a world that's already theirs." Theo nodded slowly. "You gave them more than a seat. You gave them a lesson they'll carry for life. You stood tall." Marla wiped a tear before it could fall. "I'm tired of standing tall in rooms where I shouldn't have to fight just to be." Theo reached into the seat pocket in front of him and pulled out a small leather notebook. He scribbled something quickly, then tore the page out and handed it to her. "My daughter's a civil rights attorney," he said. "She's handled flight discrimination cases before. If you want to file a complaint, she'll walk you through it. Free of charge." Marla stared at the note. "Why are you doing this? Because I wish someone had done it for my wife. Years ago, when our son got pulled out of his seat and questioned for taking a picture of the clouds. Because I see those girls of yours and think of all the children who never had a voice in these aisles." Marla took the note, folded it, and slipped it into her purse. "Thank you, Theo." They both turned forward, letting the silence settle again. But it wasn't an awkward silence this time. It was something else. Recognition, connection, quiet resistance. Back in row 2, Sarai leaned over and whispered something to Naomi. "He's talking to Mom." Naomi peeked between the seats. "Think he's a good guy. I think he's a listener." Sarai answered, "In the cockpit." Captain Vance was feeling the pressure now. Dispatch had radioed 3 times. The last call had been from operations management, asking if he had been notified about an in-flight passenger issue involving a possible policy violation. Vance didn't like vague words. He didn't like being surprised. He especially didn't like knowing that someone from the Department of Transportation had now been looped in. He turned to First Officer Denton. "You got anything else on that call?" Denton shook his head. "They just said to prepare to speak with legal after landing." "That's never good." Vance sighed. He didn't have the whole story, but he had a gut feeling it involved the family he had watched during boarding. The mother, the twins, the shift in the gate, the passive-aggressive agent with a clipboard and too much power. "I should have asked more questions," he muttered. Back in row 1, Marla checked her phone again. Still no update from Derek, but she could see the message had been marked as read. That was something. Suddenly, the intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Vance's voice echoed, "we'll begin our descent into Seattle in approximately 20 minutes. Please remain seated as we prepare the cabin." The descent had begun, but for Marla, something else had begun too. A shift inside. A flicker of something bigger than herself. She had been humiliated. Yes. But she had not been silenced. And somewhere deep in her chest, she knew this flight wasn't the end of something. It was the start of something far larger. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in loud speeches or shouting matches. Sometimes it comes quietly, right before the wheels touch the ground. The quiet inside the plane was unlike anything before. Passengers were glued to their seats, not because of turbulence, but because something heavier had settled in the cabin. The air was tense, the silence brittle. A few whispers floated from row to row, mostly in disbelief. Naomi sat upright, fingers clenched around the armrest, her jaw set, eyes fixed ahead. She didn't want to look back at her daughters, not because she was ashamed, but because if she did, she knew her strength might break. The last thing they needed right now was to see their mother fall apart. Across the aisle, Maya and Layla remained huddled. Maya's hand was still wrapped tightly around Layla's. Her sister's breathing was shaky, but steady. Neither girl cried now. They had moved past tears. What filled their hearts now was confusion, a budding sense of humiliation, and worst of all, the question no child should ever have to ask. Why us, the plane, hadn't moved. It had been a full 15 minutes since the last announcement from the gate agent. The flight attendant who had barred the girls earlier was nowhere to be seen. In her place, a young attendant named Kara stood frozen near the front galley, eyes darting nervously toward the first-class curtain as though waiting for something or someone to give her instructions. Captain Joel Harding hadn't yet returned to the cockpit. He remained in the first-class cabin, whispering intensely with the gate supervisor, whose face had turned the color of skim milk. And then Naomi stood. Her movement was soft, measured, but purposeful. She walked past her daughters, giving their shoulders a reassuring touch, and continued down the aisle until she reached the rear galley. There, she took out her phone and stared at it for a long moment. Her thumb hovered over one contact, Tobias. She had resisted making the call for nearly an hour now. She didn't want to play that card. She didn't want her daughters to grow up thinking problems were solved through status and power. But this wasn't about luxury. It was about respect. It was about decency. And no one, not even Tobias Kane, could ignore that. She tapped the screen. The call connected almost instantly. "Tobias," Naomi said, her voice even but low. He didn't speak right away, just the faint rustling of paper on his end. "Where are you?" he finally asked. "On board Flight 723, Midtown Air, headed for Seattle. Is everything all right?" She took a deep breath. The girls were denied boarding. A pause. What they tried to take their seats. The flight attendant blocked them, told them to go back to economy. When I explained those were their seats, she said she had the right to question suspicious situations. Suspicious. Tobias. Our daughters. On the other end of the line, the silence turned electric. Naomi pressed on. The gate agent sided with the crew. I had to make a scene just to get them back on. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just silence. Tobias exhaled. It was the sound of a man who had worked too hard for too long to hear those words again. "What airline did you say?" "Midtown. Flight 723. Boarding just completed 20 minutes ago. We haven't even pushed back." There was a rustling of movement. Then Tobias's voice returned, cool and precise. "Stay on that plane." Naomi's eyebrows rose. "What do you mean I need 10 minutes? No one is taking off." She knew what that meant. She'd heard that voice before, during boardroom shakeups, during acquisitions, during government audits. But hearing it now, used to defend their daughters, was different. It stirred something in her chest. Naomi returned to her seat quietly, folding herself into the cushion like she had just laid down a weapon. She looked over at Maya and Layla and gave them a small nod. They didn't understand what had happened, but they trusted it was something important. 8 rows ahead. Captain Harding's radio buzzed. He lifted it to his ear. The words on the other end made his expression drop. Within 3 minutes, the intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have just received an operational update from headquarters. At this time, we are being instructed to hold all further procedures and await additional instructions. We appreciate your patience." Another murmur spread through the cabin. In the airport's central command tower, things were unraveling fast. Midtown Air's executive team had been summoned into an emergency meeting. Phones buzzed, screens lit up with red alerts, and one name kept flashing across every terminal. Tobias Kane, CEO of AerisTech, majority stakeholder in Midtown Air's latest tech merger, and, as fate would have it, father of the 2 girls who were just denied boarding. The storm was no longer brewing. It had landed. Back on the plane. The lead flight attendant Marcus returned from the cockpit, his usually upright posture now slightly hunched. He approached Naomi slowly. "Ma'am," he began, voice strained. "I understand there's been some confusion earlier. We want to assure you that Midtown Air does not tolerate discrimination of any kind." Naomi met his gaze, unmoved, but it did happen. Marcus paused. "We are deeply sorry. You weren't even there." He had no reply, only a subtle nod. She looked back at her daughters. Layla's eyes had a glassy sheen, and brave Maya sat rigid, lips pressed tightly together. Naomi's chest filled with heat. Not just anger, not just sadness. Resolve. She leaned forward slightly and said quietly to Marcus, "I hope your apology makes it into the official report." He blinked. Naomi added, "Because you and I both know this is bigger than words." The PA system clicked again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've now been directed to deboard. All passengers will return to the gate area until further notice." Please remain seated until instructed." And just like that, the cabin filled with motion. But it wasn't chaos. It was reckoning. Passengers gathered their belongings in silence, many now aware of the family in row 17. Some stole glances of regret. Others wore guilt plainly. A few nodded at Naomi as they passed. One older woman whispered, "I'm so sorry. They're beautiful girls. They deserve better." Naomi didn't respond, but she held her daughters close, one hand on each shoulder. Together, the three of them stood. They had boarded in shame. They walked out in truth. And somewhere in a high-rise office miles away, Tobias Kane stood before a boardroom of executives, fists pressed against the glass table. He spoke 4 words that none of them would forget. "This ends right now." The silence after the captain's voice announcement stretched long and tense, like the moment before thunder crashes in a storm. Passengers stared at one another, unsure whether to speak or sit still. No one moved. At row 17, Naomi shifted her weight. Glancing from her sister to the front of the plane, Talia was biting her lip, visibly trying to hold back a flood of emotion. Across the aisle, a couple had stopped whispering. Even the baby in 21A had gone quiet, as if the air itself had thickened. Then the sound of heels echoed, measured, unhurried, not angry, not panicked, calm, steady, powerful. It was Camilla. She stepped into the front of the cabin with quiet authority. No entourage, no phone to her ear, just her presence, dressed in a deep burgundy travel coat and tailored slacks. Camilla's gaze moved slowly across the rows of seats. Some passengers instinctively straightened up. A few looked away, already guessing who she might be. She stopped beside the flight attendant who had originally barred the girls. Officer Baines, who had returned to the jet bridge, stood with his arms folded, suddenly unsure. Camilla's voice was low, but carried effortlessly. "I'd like to speak to the crew," she said. "Now." There was a pause. No one from the flight staff responded. Until finally, Captain Morris stepped out from the cockpit. His expression was drawn, less certain than before. Camilla didn't wait for his words. "My name is Camilla Duval," she said, and several passengers audibly gasped. "I am the chairwoman of Aerostar's Executive Council. This aircraft, its operations, and every single staff member on board fall under my jurisdiction." She turned slightly, letting her words settle in. An incident occurred today involving 2 young passengers, Naomi and Talia Richards. They were denied boarding on the basis of unverified status and vague policy references. That, in itself, requires review. But what followed was much more disturbing. She glanced toward Baines. He shifted uncomfortably. These girls were questioned without legal basis. Misinformation was shared, and assumptions were made because of their skin, their age, and because someone assumed they couldn't possibly belong here. Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to look down, to disappear, but she didn't, because her dad was standing there, not yelling, not angry, but seen, calm, certain. Camilla continued, "Aerostar stands for excellence, for inclusion, and for forward-thinking leadership. Or at least, that's what I believed when I took this position. But this morning, our values were tested. And not by weather or technical difficulty, but by judgment and bias." Her tone never wavered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse anyone by name. But every person in the cabin felt the weight of her words. "Now, here's what will happen," she said, still facing the captain. "This aircraft will remain grounded until we complete a personnel review. Interim leadership will be dispatched. All passengers are free to deplane or wait for the continuation of their trip under new staff leadership. But this flight, as currently operated, is no longer cleared for takeoff. Gasps, then murmurs. People reached for phones. Some applauded softly. Others looked stunned. Camilla turned to Naomi and Talia and approached slowly, giving them space. She knelt gently beside them. "I'm sorry," she said. "This should have never happened to you." Talia blinked rapidly. Naomi's eyes were wide. Her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to say thank you, but all she could manage was a nod. Behind them, a man from first class stood and spoke. "Miss Duval," he said, "as a frequent flyer, I want you to know I watched this whole thing. I said nothing, and I regret that." Camilla rose. She nodded respectfully, acknowledging that is the first step toward fixing it. More passengers began to speak up. "I filmed it," a woman said from 3 rows back. "If you need it for the report," a younger man added. "I've got the audio from when Officer Baines threatened to detain the girls. Just tell me where to send it." Naomi turned to her sister. "Do you hear?" The Talia smiled through teary eyes. "Yeah, people are actually listening." Camilla faced the cabin one final time. "I want you all to understand this. These events today are not just isolated mistakes. They are symptoms of deeper habits. But we're not going to sweep this under the rug. We're going to correct it. Thoroughly." Then she looked to her assistant, who had just arrived with a folder and a headset. "I'll be in the terminal conference room," Camilla told her. "Coordinate the reassignment of this crew immediately. Legal will be waiting." She took one last look at her daughters. "I'll see you both soon. I need 15 minutes. Naomi stood up. "Can we come with you?" Camilla paused. Then she smiled. "Absolutely." They walked off the plane together, past stunned crew members and silent passengers. But as they reached the front, one voice called out. "Ms. Duval," a teenage girl said, standing beside her mother. "I want to be like you one day." Camilla turned. "Then don't ever let anyone tell you where you don't belong." She placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder before continuing forward. As they stepped into the bright hallway of the terminal, Naomi felt something shift, not just in her chest, but in the air itself. Something old had cracked, and something new had just begun. Captain Everett Thomas stood silently outside the cockpit door, his jaw tight, his hand hovering just above the comm panel. For the last 20 minutes, he had been listening, not just to air traffic control or the engines humming in perfect sync, but to something far more disturbing what had unfolded outside his secure cabin. He had seen many things in his years as a pilot. Mechanical failures, turbulence that rocked even the bravest passengers, medical emergencies, but he had never heard a situation like this. He turned to First Officer Dana Liu, her face pale beneath the cabin lights. "I'm going out there," Everett said quietly. Dana looked alarmed. "Are you sure we're only 20 minutes out from takeoff? If this escalates, it's already escalated," he replied. He opened the door and stepped into the first-class cabin. The atmosphere was still charged with tension. Some passengers were turned in their seats, watching. Others had gone quiet, eyes darting toward the rear of the plane. He saw the girls immediately, Nia and Zuri Thomas, seated near the bulkhead, their faces turned toward the window, and he saw his flight crew, Miriam standing stiffly, arms crossed, her expression hard, Leon beside her, staring daggers at the 2 young girls as though they were still a threat. Everett cleared his throat. Miriam turned sharply. "Captain," she said, surprise flickering in her voice, "can I speak with you both?" Everett asked, in private. The two attendants exchanged glances, reluctant but obedient. He gestured toward the galley and they followed. Once the curtain closed behind them, Everett faced them squarely. "I've just finished listening to the cabin recordings," he said, "and I've also received a call from Central Command. We've been flagged." Miriam stiffened. "Flagged, yes, for discriminatory conduct. The incident with the Thomas twins was reported from multiple passengers, including the woman seated in 2B, the one you told to stay out of it." Leon shifted his weight. "We were following procedure. The girls were unaccompanied minors." "No," Everett said evenly. "They weren't." He let the silence settle. "You didn't ask for ID. You didn't scan the boarding pass. You didn't verify anything. And you both know what would have happened if those had been two white girls in matching dresses." Miriam flushed. "Are you accusing us of being racist?" "I'm stating the facts," Everett replied. "And now, the situation is no longer in your control. As of this moment, I'm relieving both of you of your duties for the remainder of the flight. You'll remain in the jump seats, and I expect no further engagement from either of you." Leon opened his mouth to protest, but Everett raised a hand. "This isn't a negotiation." He stepped out from the galley and made his way to where Zuri and Nia sat, still stiff as statues. "I'm Captain Everett Thomas," he said softly, kneeling slightly so he was eye level. "I want to personally apologize for what you experienced. You didn't deserve that. No one does." Zuri's eyes shimmered. Nia's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. "I also want you to know," Everett continued, "you're not alone. Your father has been contacted. He's doing everything in his power to make sure this never happens again. Not to you, not to anyone." The girls exchanged glances. Then Nia finally asked, "Are we in trouble?" Everett shook his head gently. "Not at all. You've done nothing wrong. In fact, you've handled this with incredible strength." He turned slightly to address the passengers seated nearby, whose ears had clearly been tuned in. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing tall, "you may have witnessed something earlier that didn't sit right with you. I want to assure you that this airline does not condone discriminatory behavior. Immediate steps are being taken. Thank you to those who spoke up. Thank you for your courage." The cabin remained silent, but a few passengers nodded slowly. One man gave a small, respectful clap. Soon, it rippled outward. Captain Everett nodded once and returned to the cockpit. Back in his seat, he exhaled slowly, as if finally releasing the tension that had knotted his spine since the moment the flight took off. He pressed the intercom button. "Flight attendants, prepare for cruising altitude." In the cabin, seated quietly and clinging to one another, Zuri and Nia held hands. Their phones buzzed. A message from their dad. "I'm proud of you. You did nothing wrong. I'm handling it." Nia blinked away a tear, but the emotional storm was not yet over, because just as they put their phones away, a notification popped up on Miriam's airline-issued tablet, still clipped to the rear jump seat. "Alert all current crew credentials under internal review. Investigation pending. No further service activity permitted until cleared." Leon cursed under his breath. In the far rear of the plane, a passenger covertly took a photo of the jump seat, the suspended crew, the twins up front, and the empty first-class seats that had once been offered to others instead of them. That photo would soon go viral. But the girls didn't know that yet. All they knew was the way it felt when someone finally stood up. Not just anyone, a captain, a man who could have stayed silent, but chose not to. And in that choice, A shift had begun, a silent rebellion, 30,000 feet in the air, a reckoning without a raised voice, only presence, only truth, only justice, whispered through action. The air inside the first-class cabin was no longer still. A strange silence had taken hold, not of peace, but of reckoning. The hush that follows the final piece on a symphony's page, the moment before thunder breaks. Harper didn't move at first. She remained seated beside her girls, her fingers loosely entwined with Maya's as the older twin leaned into her. Eden sat quietly, back straight, but her chin quivered every so often as if trying to hold in all the emotion that now threatened to pour out. Across from them, Captain Nolan Pierce stood, his hat off now, eyes locked on Officer Brad Holloway, who was still trying to explain himself to the supervisor on the other end of his radio. "We have a problem," Holloway said. "There was a misunderstanding. The girls are authorized to be in first class. Their names were on the list, and their legal guardian is a pause, then a change in his posture. His spine stiffened. He looked over at Harper. "Ms. Kingsley," he said, cautiously, "would you be willing to speak with the operations executive directly? He's on the line now." She met his gaze, then slowly stood. The hush remained. Every eye watched her. Harper took the radio from his hand without a word. For a few seconds, all that could be heard was the soft buzz of the cabin lights and the occasional shuffle of passenger feet. "This is Harper Kingsley," she said, voice calm. "Ms. Kingsley, my deepest apologies. I'm Gabriel Trent, Vice President of Airline Operations for AerisTech," came the voice through the crackling speaker. "We've been alerted to a serious breach of protocol, and we are currently grounding all outbound flights until further review." Gas rippled across the passengers. Trent continued, "I just got off the line with your husband." His request was not simply a demand. It was a declaration, effective immediately. There will be a full independent review of flight protocols, employee conduct, and racial bias training for all AeroSky staff. And I've been informed to let you know, personally, that Officer Holloway is suspended until that review is complete. The officer's mouth parted, but he didn't speak. Harper's jaw tightened slightly. "And the flight crew?" Trent hesitated for a breath. "The lead gate agent has already been placed on administrative leave. The pilot will be questioned for failure to de-escalate the situation. As for the flight attendants involved, they are being removed from this flight. You and your daughters will not be accompanied by anyone who treated you with anything less than dignity. You have my word." She nodded once and handed the radio back. It wasn't victory. It wasn't vengeance. But it was accountability. And it meant something. As the news spread, some passengers turned in their seats and clapped. Others simply looked stunned, unsure how to process what had just unfolded. No one asked for details. No one needed them. They had all seen enough. Harper sat again. Eden immediately leaned into her side. "Mom," she whispered, "is this what justice looks like?" Harper hesitated, looking down into her daughter's wide, questioning eyes. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to give her daughter that comfort. But the truth tugged at her heart. "Justice," Harper said gently, "is a beginning, not an ending." Eden blinked. Harper smoothed her daughter's hair with slow fingers. "It means someone was held responsible. But it doesn't fix what happened. It doesn't erase what you felt when someone looked at you and decided you didn't belong." Eden nodded slowly. Across the aisle, one of the passengers who had filmed the incident earlier walked up. She was in her mid-30s, a woman with soft brown curls and a determined gaze. "Ms. Kingsley," she said quietly, My name is Caroline Woods. I just wanted to thank you for what you did, for how you handled everything. That was extraordinary." Harper gave her a nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you for standing up when you did." "I have a daughter," Caroline added, glancing at Maya and Eden. "I can't imagine her going through that. But if she ever did, I'd hope there'd be someone like you sitting next to her." Harper offered a quiet smile. As Caroline returned to her seat, Captain Pierce walked over again, kneeling by their row. "The flight crew has been replaced. We're delayed about an hour while the new attendants board. But I promise, you will be treated with respect for the rest of this flight. You have my word." Harper looked at him carefully. She saw something shift in him. Not just duty, but remorse. "I appreciate that," she said. Before returning to the cockpit, Pierce looked to Eden and Maya. "You two okay?" he asked gently. They nodded. "You're stronger than most adults I've met," he said. "I'm proud to be your captain today." As he left, Maya finally spoke. "Mom," she said, voice fragile, "why do they see us like that? Why do people just assume we're not allowed to be somewhere?" Harper's heart twisted. She didn't want to deliver the truth with bitterness, but neither would she shield them with lies. "Because some people carry fear inside them," she said, "and that fear tells them stories that aren't true, that someone who looks different must be less. That power belongs to one kind of person, not all people." Maya nodded, but didn't speak again. Later, as the plane began taxiing again, and the lights of the runway painted soft streaks along the windows, Harper sat with her daughters wrapped in her arms. No one disturbed them. Not the new crew, not the pilot, not the passengers. The tension had eased, but in its place came reflection. She remembered sitting in airports as a child with her own mother, waiting patiently, always instructed to keep her head down and never cause a scene. That was survival. That was the cost of invisibility. But her daughters had been seen, and that meant something was changing. Maybe not the whole world, but enough of it to begin again. At 37,000 feet, Harper closed her eyes, and for the first time since boarding, she let her body rest. But even in rest, her spirit stood. Not in protest, but in promise. A promise that they would never have to fight alone again. Not while she had breath. Not while she had voice. Not while she had love. The silence in the first-class cabin was thick, the kind of silence that held breath and memory. As the plane sat grounded on the tarmac of Horizon Air's private terminal in Seattle, everyone waited. Passengers, crew, even the security team on standby, outside Gate 3. They waited for the final verdict, not from a judge or a court, but from something deeper, from consequence, from truth. Kendra held her sister's hand, fingers tightly intertwined. Kalani hadn't let go since their father walked down the jet bridge flanked by 2 board members and the company's chief of internal ethics. She had never seen her dad like that before. Not furious, not broken, but still, impossibly still. Like the ocean before a storm that was already forming over the horizon. Dorian Holloway stepped back onto the plane slowly. His charcoal gray suit was untouched, every line of fabric pressed and perfect. But something in his eyes had shifted. It was a quiet sadness, one only those who had been betrayed by something they built themselves could understand. Behind him followed Elaine Harper, the interim COO, and Jerome Maddox, the head of legal compliance. No smiles, no greetings, just silence and wait. And, "May I have your attention?" Dorian said softly. But the cabin was already still, every eye on him, every phone recording, I started Horizon Air with one goal: to build something that was more than transportation. I wanted it to carry dignity, possibility, and trust. Today, that was broken, and not by strangers. He turned toward the crew. Captain Voss sat rigidly in his seat, eyes down. Marla, the flight attendant who had told his daughters they didn't belong in first class, looked away. Her jaw clenched, knowing the camera phones were capturing every second. I watched my daughters get treated like intruders, because of how they look, because someone made an assumption. That assumption nearly led to violence. And the worst part of it is that this isn't rare. It's not new. It's just usually unseen. Kalani swallowed hard. Her eyes shimmered. Dorian reached for her hand and gave it a light squeeze. "I have made the decision," he continued, "to suspend Horizon Air's national operations for 48 hours. Every crew member involved in this flight will be placed on immediate review, not just for what they did, but for what they allowed." Gas echoed. From the passengers. From the staff. The woman from seat 3B, the one who had rolled her eyes earlier, was now filming with a trembling hand. No one had expected this. Grounding an airline. For one incident. But Dorian wasn't finished. "I've authorized a full racial bias audit across all departments, from check-in to cabin, from executive office to entry level. We will no longer measure our success in seats sold. We will measure it in respect earned." Captain Voss finally looked up, shame sinking into the corners of his face. But Marla shook her head ever so slightly. Defiant, still unrepentant. Dorian turned to her. "Ms. Grant, you have been a senior attendant for 12 years. I know your personnel file by heart. And yet today, you humiliated my daughters on the basis of appearance. You attempted to physically remove 2 minors without verification of boarding records. You endangered them. And worse, you believed you were right." She opened her mouth, then shut it. Her face turned red, not with guilt, but fury. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately," he said. The security officer outside stepped in, calmly, respectfully, and Marla stood, back straight. She left without a word. But as she passed Kendra and Kalani, her eyes met theirs. For a brief moment, Kalani thought she might see regret, but she didn't. Just pride. Hollow, bitter pride. Kendra felt it in her stomach. The kind of tension that lives in children who grow up having to prove their worth, who are taught to smile even when they are invisible. Today, she hadn't been invisible. She had been seen, but not in the way she wanted. Elaine Harper stepped forward next, to the passengers of this flight, and to the Holloway family. Horizon Air extends its deepest apology. We have failed you, but this moment will not be wasted. Passengers nodded, some with tears. A woman in row 5 leaned over and whispered to her son, explaining in a hushed voice what was happening and why it mattered. Kendra felt Kalani shift beside her. She looked over. Her sister's eyes were focused not on the CEO father they knew, but on the world that was changing because of him. "Daddy," Kalani whispered, her voice small. Dorian looked down, smiling faintly. "Yes, baby, will we ever fly again?" It was such an honest question. The kind children ask when something big has happened, something too vast to explain, but too loud to ignore. He crouched to her level, brushing a loose curl from her cheek. "We will. But next time, we'll fly, knowing the skies are safer because we spoke up. The engines were silent. No takeoff, no destination. But something had already arrived." Outside the terminal, a quiet crowd had gathered. Word had traveled fast. Employees, journalists, even former passengers from other flights, holding signs that said things like, Dignity takes flight today, and we believe you. Girls. Kendra blinked back tears. This wasn't just about them anymore. It never had been. Hours later, after the plane had been emptied and crews dismissed, the three of them stood in the hallway of the terminal. The sun was setting outside the glass wall. It painted their faces in soft gold and long shadows. Dorian took a deep breath and looked at both of them. "You okay?" he asked. Kendra nodded. Kalani hugged him. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not just for calling me, but for being brave, for knowing you didn't deserve what happened." The girls leaned into him, each on one side. A small family. A big story. Somewhere, planes were still flying. But this one this day would echo long after the runway was cleared. Because sometimes, the most powerful takeoffs don't happen in the sky. They happen when someone refuses to be grounded. Sometimes, the most powerful voices are the quiet ones. Callie and Sierra didn't shout. They didn't argue. They didn't fight back. They simply held on to each other and waited for truth to catch up. And when it did, it roared through boardrooms. It echoed through terminals. And it reminded the world that justice isn't always loud. It's steady. It's patient. And it always finds its way. This story wasn't just about two little girls being denied a seat on a plane. It was about how deep our biases run, about how easy it is to overlook a child because of the color of her skin, and about how dangerous it is to judge people before knowing who they are or who they belong to. Lennox Hayes didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't have to, because the moment he stood in his truth, the sky stood still. If this story moved you, if you believe dignity should never be negotiable, then carry this with you. Speak up when others are silenced. Look deeper when others dismiss. And always, always remember the smallest voices often carry the biggest truths. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that speak from the heart, challenge injustice, and celebrate the strength we carry together. We'll see you in the next one.